Let me just confirm that it worked. Today is 30th, right? 30th.
Hmm.
Save the file. All right, its stream is live. Hello and welcome everyone. Today's stream is going to be a little bit smaller, but we still wanted to record this because I know for sure now somebody at least outside like the two of us is watching the stream and commenting on it. So hi Sumit, thanks for watching the streams. Um, and with that said, let's go on. So yeah, you were saying something. Please continue.
I don't even know where does one comment. I only have the private links.
It's not private. It's public. It's
It's
just that they're
acha,
going to.
unlisted.
No, they go into the
Acha.
live tab. They don't go into the videos tab.
Oh,
So
right.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
if you go to my channel and like so that's the thing. I think we should start like I still haven't been able to so both my phone numbers are like attached to the YouTube channels that I already have. So it needs a new number, verification number. So if you don't have one, I can use yours. It's just like a verification thingy. And once that is done, then and some more stuff in order to be able to upload very long videos or like community guideline stuff, like so that you're not abusing the platform that way, right? So that just is required to be able to stream to Anthropic Inertia channel itself. So we'll for anybody watching this, we will basically move the as in this podcast or this discussion over to that channel sometimes soon in the future. We're working on it. But YouTube has now the videos, shorts, and live separated out, which is super cool, I think, because previously what was happening, I lost a few subscribers as well, because if I go live, people will get notification and they're like, what is this guy doing right now? They're expecting a video. But now this guy is like screwing unscrewing devices and computers, etc. Like, this is not interesting, this is boring, why did I get notification for this? And then they will unsubscribe. I understand because I also got the same kind of feeling from other people. So that was annoying, so YouTube removed it, and I like it the way it is done now. So all those tabs now have their different merits. Some of them I don't use yet. Yeah.
That makes sense. Cool. So I know we're going to keep this short.
Mm.
Um, so maybe just nudge in the direction of the topic that we were thinking of. Roughly speaking, what we discussed was the future of software development.
Mm-hmm.
I would maybe qualify that a wee bit more just
Mm-hmm.
to make sure it's not beyond, like it's not overly generalistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the future of software development as we see it for ourselves is probably a good
Yep.
scope so that we don't fall into the applicability aspect or the capability aspect of things.
Right. um so how about so the way I was thinking about it is that how does the landscape change when you introduce the tools that are currently being available because of the generative AI and the coding AI and stuff. So I was trying to compare that with, okay, if you some of the fundamental shifts in perspective, things that are true for humans to approach in a certain way are not necessarily true if you include that into the picture. So basically counterfactuals in a sense. Like there's some baselines are shifted so that you have to rethink the whole process. So there are different schools of thoughts of how to approach the software uh, development process itself. But I'm coming to a new kind of model. I want to go as in pitch that or propose that. How do you think that we should approach this? By the way, she asked me to like sit in and watch what we do. So that's why she's allowed here. She's not allowed to be naughty. Okay. With that said, let's continue.
Cool. Okay, so I would recommend that if you're talking of a model, then maybe present it more like a theory with its like what with the applicability, the scope, and then the conjecture or the hypothesis, however far you want
Yeah.
to go.
Right.
And then the other thing maybe to clarify would be what would be the test conditions
Right.
of that
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah.
then we can take it. I'm completely okay if it stays abstract, or it stays more at a metaphysical level, or like throwaway metaphysics. Like if it stays at an analytically, or like let's be more specific. If it's more inductive as opposed to deductive, and then stays in the realm of mere clouded thoughts, that's fine as well.
Okay, so usually like it's hard to be objective when the decide like the a thought and the decision comes from the same mind, but I think it's pretty practical and implementable right now that way, right? So
Yeah.
it's not gonna be too abstract. If anybody like what I'm gonna say, if anybody wants to go ahead, probably I'm gonna do that as well. Like when I find the project for it, like a particular paid project that I want to do in a certain way, I will approach it that way as well. So before I go on that, would you like to like reflect on the part like what is it like what are the schools of thought, which one do you align with, which one do you think that we can like utilize, like what is the what is your best case scenario that you're thinking of, because otherwise like what I'll be speaking to you will be in a void. Instead of that I want to like find the um like the dual like the other dual the other of the dual essentially duality. um
I am not sure if I would say I would align with a specific school of thought at this point. Uh, the reason being, either they are, I mean, you need to look at who are the people who are interested in frontiers of software development. And you see an intersection, people with like who are actually pushing the limits of development tools in computing, then those who are pushing the limits of consumer tools, or like bringing technology to the masses. So to say, we usually call that B2C.
mm,
Um, then there is the academic approach, which pretty much precedes what we see today. That um, in the sense that a lot of the things we are seeing come out in the last few months are just culmination, or like applicable application of certain kinds of research in some direction. Um, and then you also have the people who are interested about information architecture, systems design, and so basically the broader information theory and systems theory
mhm,
intersection.
mhm, mhm.
My view of technology is more through this lens,
I see.
the information and systems lens. As a result, in my view, I don't see a good or bad implementation of technology, as much as in this sense, I would say I'm more. It might look utilitarian, but it's actually way more systems oriented, and at times, system oriented design tends to look utilitarian because it takes a certain middle ground in whether something is good or bad. So that said, if I am to sum up the current trend, um, and the place where I see software development going specifically, is it is making the more difficult parts of logic. We have reached the next level of higher order development,
Mhm,
and everything that has happened trend wise, if you look at the trend of technology, it is always more and more adoption, but not as consumption, from a creator's perspective that drives innovation and mass. And just to bring up an example, if you look at printing press as the example, uh, from printing press being like the first iteration that ships out, in which the King James Bible was printed, and then more accounting documents and things started getting printed. But then the so-called democratization of printing technology actually happened with the printing press itself being manufactured to be sold to presses, leading to the rise of more independent publishing houses. And then eventually the system sort of spreads enough that it starts into, when more people are creating as opposed to just consuming,
Mm-hmm.
relative ratio.
Mm-hmm.
But then this bringing in of more creators eventually brings in more consumers, because now it is, you can use the same media to then, write your propaganda machine, write your fiction, write your fan fiction. You've just opened up the limits at that point. Now, at this point, there is a slippery slope in analysis if you just apply the progress from pre-printing press to post-printing press availability in information architecture and spread and organization and systems organization to the next cliff that we are kind of crossing now.
Mm-hmm.
The analogies can be roughly similar, but
Mm-hmm.
the analogies also tend to be reductionist because
Mm.
you don't look at the complexity of the culmination of things at this point in time.
Right.
And as a result, I believe you cannot decouple technological growth with all the other challenges that we face as a
Right.
society, as a species, as a planet, and so on. The good news is that the intelligence, and I guess this is where I kind of, again, pause just that brief much when I try to say artificial intelligence, because I think one of the camps which you can put me in where I can have a partial membership is where I look at the current growth of artificial intelligence as a place where it's a synergy between human intelligence and silicon based intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be embeddable, it like more of the cybernetic
Mm-hmm.
direction. It might be external, where you, again, all of these are cybernetic, but I meant the embedded cybernetics on
Mm-hmm.
your body,
Mm-hmm.
in your mind, kind of cybernetics,
Mm-hmm.
versus the external entity, external cybernetic entity. So you have data from Starfleet in that
Right.
direction, right? And then you have everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
What I am interested in really is that I see the ability to build and think in terms of logical reasoning, in terms of, more of understanding technology by understanding logic,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and by understanding logic becoming better at analysis, and eventually the human brain being put to use in the exact area where it adds to technological stack, that is all analytical decisions, all logical uh, boundary definitions. Now, till date, the ability to write good software was limited to a specific set of people you needed, and we have seen this expand again and again, like if from assembly language to the early higher level languages to what we have now. I am looking at a next leap, more broadening of the horizons to include more, where I see some of these pre-existing good technologies, say Rust, say well, JavaScript in some of its forms, and uh, some of these more widely available and efficient technologies combining with the ability to predict, generate, are going to build this, or hopefully can build this landscape where the human comes in as the sort of the composer of a music,
Fantastic.
that you don't then need to be that efficient in playing a specific device. But if you understand music, if you understand frequencies, scales, resonances, you can layer complexity bit by bit on top of it. So in that sense, I'm looking at individuals becoming, taking on that role of the composer of an orchestra when it comes to technologies and being able to conduct. What that means for those people developing
Mm-hmm.
the technology, one of the very first things they have to rethink, and I guess this is one place where I want to now hand off to you, is what are the points of intervention that a human agent would make in a system governed by other forms of intelligences as well.
Right.
And there is a certain level of humility that needs to come in.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be high-handed about humanity being top of food chain, top of everything anymore, because you're not sharing a classroom
Yeah.
of sorts
Yep.
with other species. You
even
better start
with,
thinking on
yeah,
those lines.
yeah, even with humans. So taking the ball over here, so if you made a couple of fantastic points that I really want to reflect on. No, Vishnu. Um, so okay, to refocus back. First of all, I love the part about being a composer. I tried to look for like a good terminology, but I couldn't find it. This works. So the way I wanted to start explaining my side of the thing is not only that you're sharing it with a higher or a different order of intelligence, it's also you're also sharing as a developer, you're also sharing more so than before and gradually more so. That part is kind of linear or like a progress that is with even more humans at a massive scale. That happens. And reconciling with that, keeping an order in that chaos, right? Give me a moment, please. Hello. Sorry. Um, um, so, if you think of the entire cognitive instrument that we have, it built up in stages, like the reptilian brain, mammalian brain, then the frontal cortex, etc. That they have multiple layers and different levels of functions that they dedicate themselves to, right? And the part that you can see is that lower order brain functions are more for preservation and the higher order brain functions are more for exploration. And lower order brain functions are more autonomous in the sense and higher order brain functions are more like connecting with each other, like designed for that kind of purpose. And if you see that there's a fourth layer now and a very established, it was building up for last couple decades or so. Now we have the huge amount of a fourth layer that is not inside the skull anymore. That's the part that we want to get to, because that's right now we're at the breaking point where that part is starting to outpace or outmaneuver the one that is inside. Like it's taking over. It was so far an underdeveloped part, but now it is becoming an overdeveloped part. How do you reconcile with that? So that's where my the model that I'm thinking about comes in, is that the composer, what do they do, and how do you see the development, like the progress of who would be the person like writing software has been so far. Somebody who is like a very thin niche kind of set of mind that exactly did what they wanted to do, and that's all their life and everything. Like they spent thousands of hours training themselves, like build that muscle to do something, and then they did exactly that, and something nice came out of the other end. Some more people got interested and broadened that spectrum. Now we're at a point where the difference between the outcome, software outcome, by software outcome I mean that can be anything. It can be a website, it can be a desktop app, doesn't matter. The point is that outcome is only limited by your intent or imagination, what you intend it to be. If you can, like, basically communicate, intent and communication, if you can prompt it to that way. So in that regard, what would we need to have to get that done, right? Now I'll get to, like, from the abstract explanation to a very execute, something that people can go ahead and do that, like right now. We already have those API descriptors, like you take API blueprint or Swagger, all those different things already there. What do they allow us is to express how something should be, the declarativeness of this is the end result, how it should be. I'm expecting an integer here, etc., etc. It's not the type part, it's basically the expectation, what the expectation is. Now, if you can do that properly, then you can write tests, like software can write tests now, and then validate whether the code matches with the test, or as in the intention or not. right? So you can create a mock APIs for that, and all those different things. If you can express, that was already there. If you can express what you want in a programmatic manner, those things either uses YAML or JSON, which is still not a normal person thing, still a programmer thing. So that is the reason, that was the blocker that I'm saying that we are crossing now. So previously you needed to be a developer even to speak that language, speak the intent. So then the rest of the implementation can be kind of automated or handed off the mundaneness of it. Now I can pretty confidently say that you can even get that descriptor or the spec instead of descriptor. Like, I'm not talking specifically or only about those things like API description, I'm talking in general. We can build up, you can use that, but you can build up specs for software, how software can be approached in the first place, any kind, like generalize it, and then say the intent so that the descript, like the specs can be written in a programmatic manner, generated in programmatic manner, and then you create the entire ecosystem around the tooling around it, which also can be picked and chosen from the menagerie of all the things that you have. LangChain comes into play in that, like deciding which tool to use for what kind of purposes. And then you have where you just said, hey, I want a news, like AI news website, which looks up at these data sources and shows it in this manner, this particular fashion. Now you will see the result, you don't like the particular part, and you then ask it to be improved in a certain way, and the update is now applied. All you need to do basically is to be aware, or like be in peace or be in terms with your intention, have a very clear picture of that, which is going to become the most prevalent part. How clear of a picture do you have, and how well can you express it, which is why I'm pushing myself also so hard to download my brain essentially. This is one of the efforts, right? Why am I doing this is because so far I've been living inside my head for the most part of my life, but it is seeming more and more important to be able to like share it or give it to somebody else for them to understand it, get it. Sometimes that might not even be human, and that is fine, absolutely fine. But whoever has the best picture inside their head of what they want and how well they can paint that picture of what the intention is. And the third auxiliary part is that how do you adversarially determine whether it matches or not. Just because you're trying to be nice, whatever BS that came out, you said, okay, I'll just go ahead with it. How okay are we to accept a BS versus no, I need to tune that out. So those three things, basically, if you get those three things right, everything else can fall into place. As I said, like, you are familiar with those tools, you know that for API designing, at least we can do that right now. For the other parts, some extra tooling might be required, but that again is a part of the whole process. It's a self-improving process in the first place. So that's where my understanding currently is. What do you think?
I do think it's like what you just said in terms of I felt like you got a bit conservative at some points
Very
because
much.
it kind of said just like immediate next
Yep.
steps basically. But if that was the intention, then that completely came through. There are, well, two things I wanted to bring up here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if we'll go into any of those, but maybe just to leave as a pointer. One is what I was saying earlier, and I guess you kind of reflected in some of the things that you said, is there are certain technologies that in isolation have grown up currently to a stage, a more higher ranked um, model, the ability to execute higher ranked model was what was missing to tie a bunch of these things together, because that
Yes.
is where you would fall back to more declarative programming and so on.
Yep.
Now, I want to explicitly name a few of this.
Right.
So, what till last year, before LLMs emerged on the scene in the enterprise tech industry, was the low code, no code buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I called it a buzzword at that point because again, I'll go out on a limb and say this: the people who were building no code systems thought they were inventing something really cool. And I hate to break the bubble here that they were exactly reinventing the wheel in the same order that flow-based programming had already perfected theoretically and in every other means. There were certain constraints, and I did bring up in probably in our first discussion that there were certain constraints to why flow-based programming did not catch the mainstream attention in 60s and 70s when it started becoming uh, a well robust theoretical framework, and a bunch of them were connected to parallel execution of modules. So essentially, I see flow-based programming
Hmm.
and the ability to connect different computing agents or the different functions, let's say, the input of one to the output of other, such that you can build a circuit. These
Hmm.
were these things were inspired from hardware design. That why do we design circuits the way we do? Turns out we can reason if we encapsulate logic in a certain component that focuses on that logic and thus make it repeatable. Manufacturing becomes easier. So flow-based programming was kind of taken from that, but then went into the software domain to really get to a few key things. One, can we express programs declaratively?
Yeah.
And turns out you very well can. Can we execute programs, those declarative programs, execute them in a deterministic environment?
Hmm.
Turns out you can. How does then such a system integrate with other systems? And turns out all hell breaks loose at that point. Because the common data types, like one of the things, if you were to map this in a Rust model, the fundamental change that flow-based programming or any such paradigms talk of is you stop thinking of your program in terms of code or in terms of classes.
Hmm.
You start thinking of your program in terms of
Yes.
data manipulation from beginning to end through certain stages. Now, where exactly does a LangChain or any higher ranked um, AI system today fits in is it will be able to compute those paths that much more better. It might be able to, given a certain declarative syntax, be able to build a certain thing for you. As it learns, it might be even given a certain set of data, it will be able to give you the query language, right? So the ability to run systems
Hmm.
the way you are working, which leads me to the second 1.2,
Hmm.
not 2.1. So 1.2 is combinatorial mathematics. And
Yeah.
flow-based programming builds on top of combinatorial mathematics, and in casual lingo, we call Lego, and we're done with it.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, what combinatorial mathematics talks of is you are breaking down things into reusable components and then seeing how they combine. The third part here happens to be um, what we are seeing as a wave of edge computing, local first systems, and more heavy client, like thick client, thin server uh, scenario where you might even in certain situations relegate the task of a server based deployment, a centralized deployment, as the router.
Yeah.
It's the data router and connector,
Yeah.
right? Then combined these
Orchestrator in
three,
a like distributed supercomputer in a sense for your
I mean,
services.
an SFU
Yeah.
in WebRTC world, like,
Yeah.
so if basically what would have happened if Google Meet provided just an SFU, you already had a thick client.
Yeah.
It kind of starts sounding like pre-Facebook internet, that you could like use Pigeon, connect to a server, and go from there.
Hmm.
And the fourth part of that technology puzzle is the ability to deterministically test a
Hmm.
fundamentally chaotic system.
Hmm.
And that is where chaos engineering and all of those things that even Netflix has pioneered kind of comes in.
Hmm.
But then what happens? Then this is where I come to point two. I have I have a worry as I see the landscape grow.
Hmm.
This is not like the 80s internet landscape. This is not that open. Things are not that reproducible. And I am increasingly worried at the number of commercial options. Yeah, a lot of the things that you just said, that maybe somebody should do this. I know API tooling companies which are doing exactly that. In fact, those things are out in the market as of last month.
Mm-hmm.
I know companies which are now providing end-to-end website development systems.
Yeah.
Again, using the same paradigm.
Yeah.
Everybody is reinventing that thing again and again in this for the sake of short-term commercialization.
Yes.
I see a huge gaping need, even if it is to like build alternatives to some of those. That one option, one direction is you just blindly build open source alternatives for every commercial tooling that exists.
Right.
That has been the open source way. I think it's time to take a stand and say that no, we are going to build a non-compromising system that allows people to dedicate, like combine and do things in that function, that certain fundamental computing elements can be combined to the point that it becomes pretty much, if you observe Star Trek ships closely, it just like, and the dashboard, it just looks like it's a bunch of combinatorial thing that they're doing. They just, randomly press the same buttons.
Yeah.
um, what is happening behind the hood is creation of pipelines, creation of
Yeah.
logical pipelines that are being deployed instantly. I want to get to that. And I think that is the immediate next low hanging fruit
Right.
in terms of software development,
Hmm.
that it is time to build yet another framework. But this time, build that framework such that you take that application as a data processing engine end to end, like a data manipulation engine end to end, means that you should primarily gear it towards information, um, like not manipulation, rather like
Transformation. Yes.
information, like transformation, archival, and retrieval. If you can give a combination of these, open those tech stacks, like you said, one the last day, I see huge value in like building, splitting this walled ecosystem again.
Right.
By cross-cutting them, at some point people will should ideally start asking that, hey, this is a better alternative, why can't you provide me the same guarantees? And I don't expect to win over those users.
Hmm.
My goal behind doing all of this is, one, I have something that I can trust on to run my computing,
Right.
which is scratch my own itch wala problem.
Right.
The second is, it might just drive more transparency in the way software is being built today.
Right. Now you have the direction that you went in is the part that I kind of left out. Is that when I said for some aspect of the story, some toolings are there, but for other parts there isn't. So the like so basically implication, the implicit intent, or like the my notion towards that is that we need to build it, and if we need to build it, how do we build it? That TXRX model, the transmit receive model, the IO model, right? So the what's the baseline of modularity or composability is that the Legos circular thing that adapts into one another, right? So that's the one is transmit, one is receive in that sense. So as long as we can build on that, that problem can be solved. It's not an unsolvable problem. Now, coming down to the point of how do we approach it, and how do we, like, your worry about the industrialization or commercialization of those tools so far, and how short-sighted that is, and how more than short-sighted, it's more of a like a it's a game, it's a race to the bottom in a sense. Nobody's uplifting the whole. It's just they're trying to uplifting themselves to the point, like they're just basically which crab can pull the other one down. It becomes that game instead of anybody, like, or everybody getting out of the bucket. It's a weird analogy. I don't know all of the members. I'm not going to explain that right now. Now hardware has, because of the way it works, hardware had to figure that part out faster and better. That challenge is still there, but I wanted to show you, and then I'll come back to the software aspect of the part that I want to talk about. But give me a moment. I will I'll give you something that we talked about before, like last week, and I'm working on it. I'll give you a sneak peek. Give me a second. So this is a Raspberry Pi HQ camera module, right? You can, it can have interchangeable lens. So this is the sensor inside, and this is the lens. This is the lens that I'm gonna use. So this is a small lens. This is 6mm lens, but it has all the like how much wide you want to make it and all that kind of stuff. So this plugs in and through something called C or CS mount. There's an adapter for that as well if you want to adapt from C mount to CS mount or E mount or whatever that is, right? So one thing aspect. The other part is that this connector that you see, this is for Raspberry Pi. So this is called a CS, like this is a FPC, but the connection, the interface mechanism is called CSI, camera serial interface. That's the one that most single board computers use for camera. Now, I don't want to use it to add it to yet another computer, even if it's small. I want to use it as a replacement to webcam that I have and make a better version of it. So what I'm gonna use it with then a board that takes that IO, CSI IO, and converts that into a USB UVC video stream, right? And then I have the USB cable there. So then you can just plug it into your computer, normal computer. It gets detected as a normal camera, and then you can use it as a webcam that the way we are using it right now. The point that I'm trying to get to is that most of the time, most of the organizations that are trying to commercialize something, like you wouldn't get this kind of modularity in a mobile camera, thing that is inside your mobile. Even though it's modular, you can actually open the camera module out. The details about that, how can you make a board, adapter board, and you can use it there, that detail is not public information. But it's not that it's not modular. So by design, it has to follow that same principle. It's just that people find ways to make more money by limiting that information. For software, the challenge is it's easier to integrate whole thing together and like make a khichdi than not to do that. Which is why the part that I was trying to get to eventually is that now we have to start thinking about. So one thing that Raspberry Pi Foundation that they cracked is that how to make enticing new these kind of tools that like allows you to scratch your own itch. It gives you that modularity, gives you that freedom. However, it's still not something that is just a cash grab. It is trying to elevate you and not their profit margin. So what can you learn from that? I'm just using Raspberry Pi not to put them in a spot. I'm like, there are other hardware vendors I can name as well, but like Framework is one. Like if I'm not mistaken, Fairphone is one. I'm not sure which one, but the point is there are other efforts. It's harder in actually in hardware to do it right because it takes a lot of amount of initial cash or initial capital. But by the nature of hardware, as I try to demonstrate, it needs that from this kind of lens to that kind of sensor, or from this kind of signal to that kind of signal, you need those stages to be IO driven as much as possible, and like a clearly communicated specs. There's no like there isn't any guesswork. There cannot be any guesswork if you want to be like appeal to most number of like downstream users for that, the developers who are gonna build the hardware. However, because how easy it is to start with software, you can do it poorly. The part of the reason why JavaScript is so successful, you can write poorly, even then it works. I don't want to ride a high horse, but the point is you cannot have both of those things, not at least at the beginning. You have to approach it in either direction. And given that we approached for the software industry, the way it works is that we went for the spread first, but the design part also has to come later. For hardware industry, it came the other way around. The design, the principles came in first, and now they're trying to figure out how to make it more appealing, how to spread it out, how to even do it poorly and then it works, then still it works. Those kind of things. Trying for the reach and give the freedom later, but they figured out the what are the things that works well, what kind of modularity they should be going for, that part first. I don't know whether approaching it from the other end is just as viable, but I think there is an opportunity there, and I would love to hear some thoughts before I put my also like start thinking about that thing. So that's where I'll ask you: have you given some thought about how to make that enticing, how to make that process for software engineering, how to start with the baseline? Hey, have you considered doing this? There are some efforts from UI components to various other things, but why does it not catch on, first of all, as much as we would like? And second, what are the things that they're still not getting it right or getting it wrong or maybe doing in the pocket?
I think my answer to this would be would have been different if you had asked me this question like in 2016, because certain things have improved since then. Some things have gotten worse, right? But in short, I think what the hardware versus software, like the design first principle, boils down to: do you think before you talk, or do you think before you act, or do you act and then try to rationalize whatever you've done? Now, if you happen to be somebody who has seen value or prefers to think before you act, then always design comes first.
Absolutely.
And the design can be in any form. A lot of my personal work in developer relations has been teaching this unlearning of act before you design, and talk more of design first principles and what are the values of it. And at times it gets too boring. I'm like, what's so difficult to understand about this concept? You plan, then you work so that you act within the boundaries of what you have planned. And the standard rebuttal that you get from the software industry against that is, we don't have that many hours.
Hmm.
It's like, we,
That
let's
is
say
very
we are,
counterintuitive. I can prove it otherwise, but I know you can as well. But yeah.
yeah. Now, that is how I have kind of, I keep coming back to this point. If you are just paying for, I mean, if, and in this case, I also want some responsibility to be on the people who are commissioning a work.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, so in this case, either the product managers or the CXOs or the independent people, organizations who need some work done, is the moment you are putting more value on the development,
Mm-hmm.
and development hours are what you bill for.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody building the software is fundamentally going to be geared towards building first, giving you the bill, and then, like,
Fixing
and
later.
you are then fixing that later. So you are as good as going to a doctor. So this industry has started becoming a mirror of our medical industry in India, in many a sense, that you never ask a question to your doctor, right? You go to your doctor, assume that they know, you have this implicit understanding, and this is a very Indian thing. It won't exist in many developed countries with good public healthcare system. In fact, does not exist to that extent in Kerala
Mm-hmm.
than it does in West Bengal. So the difference that I'm trying to point out here is, when it comes to design first, there is no alternative. Even if you eventually design, let's say, and if you are somebody who just wants to like to get into the code and start building, you have probably designed already in your head.
Hmm.
At no point you should just jump into the code straight away. So in that sense, I do believe that it is imperative that and even more so in the current landscape, you need to plan out, you need to simulate, you need to test before you implement, becomes more and more and more important.
Mm-hmm.
But not from the AI will take over the world kind of thing. More from, you're going to build software which might hurt people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still a thing.
One thing to note there, just to clarify for people who are maybe following along, the reason it is so important or crucial is that it's not that what you're doing or what your intention or the part of the bad design is directly going to affect it, but what you're building can be, or ideally should be, used as part of a bigger or better or different design or different kind of tooling as a next order of magnitude. And if that has some flaws, it will transcend. If the system is bigger, if your core key module has an issue with the security system, the SSL, it depends on older SSL version, and the software that is built with it shows that vulnerability and opens up the data, that is that crosses the boundary that you have designed it for, essentially. So in that way, that planning is valuable. It's not really for exactly what you can do with exactly with that piece of software right now or in that form, but how does it translate when it's used in the ecosystem overall. Sorry, not to like completely
No,
detour
I
the
know. I
discussion.
kind of did one of those logical jumps there, and it would have been difficult to see otherwise. But what I'm trying to say is that it does not take that much effort to just take a step back at your planning stage or all along ask what if questions. That what if this variable changes? And in more testing oriented development, you have given when then as a framework, or if this then that. But in any case, what you want to be doing is planning a wee bit before, and this is where I see the value, because if you plan better, you can possibly write a more declarative, a better declarative statement, something that actually encapsulates all possible logical flow.
Right.
And I am glad to say that we have reached a point in technology where I don't care if it's a natural language input or if it's a programming language input. It's irrelevant. Eventually, something is going to parse whatever you have written to feed into this system in the structure that it understands. So I do like, the reason I said all of this is I do have a bunch of things that I think that can be immediately done.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of that, I wanted, because that's a larger discussion. I think where I want to hand over is that I see the value of taking a few thumb rules, like write it on your wall or write it in your diary and follow them. One of them is, if you are building a system that incorporates any AI feature, what would it look like if a human or any other user does not want to use that aspect of things? So it's time to stop thinking of an AI enabled or AI based applications as either they are purely AI driven. If anything is at this point, it's not. There are only certain aspects of a program that tends to be AI driven. Uh, but in any case, figure out, ask the what if questions, that what would it look like. It's more to test. It's kind of like the Node.js thing, that what would my website look like if I were to turn off JavaScript.
Right.
Now the reason Node.js was important was it was a time when browsers did not have sufficient sandboxing and protection from executing JavaScript.
Malicious code. Yeah.
So people were obvious to be skeptic. So we have a parallel here, that right now we are in that no AI equivalent, that till there are better safeguards in place, or the system that I'm using, I might not want, because in my view, using more diplomatic language, it's a rogue agent. I do not trust it. So I need time to build trust. So what does that time to build trust look like? Second, a design maxim that I follow is in many sense the exact antithesis of the jobs derived design, the Steve Jobs, is your customer is not stupid. You do
Depends who
not,
you're building it for, but okay, go on. Yeah.
no. So I'm saying your customer is not stupid in the sense that they cannot think. If you're targeting a specific kind of environment, there might be control. So again, what this comes down to is what are those interaction points.
Right.
So chart out, one of the things to plan out very clearly is what are the human interaction points in your system
Hmm.
that you are building. And finally, do not play alone. So I would ask everybody and anybody building software here on after and forever, I have told this, do not build for yourself in the way that do not build a system that cannot communicate with other things.
Hmm. For sure.
The software industry, the enterprise software industry knows this in the term of integrations.
Mm-hmm.
That what are the integrations that your system can have? Because
Right.
it's easier to build a specific purpose, very good system that integrates and lets like works with wherever are the other areas of those. So as you are building, keep that integration story in mind. So anyway, these were the broader things. So since you asked what are the whether
Right.
planning or not, but then I also do have some specifics in terms of what such an implementation could look like.
Hmm. Right. So how about we come to that discussion? Maybe you write that out or like uh, something that we can show and tell. I'm not sure exactly how that might come along, but what would happen is that there will be something more tangible for people to follow along, right? That's or the people to follow along, as in for us to follow along at the time being, for the time being maybe, but we can consolidate it eventually. The GitHub is up, and go ahead, create all the things that you want. Um, where I was going with this, I was trying to reflect on the part about coming to those building those maxims, which is what the question I was asking. So I see the value in it. I do think deliberation extensively is a key aspect to that. Like it is very much required. You cannot just come from one aspect. One like errata I would add to your customers is not stupid. It depends who your customers are, and I say that with the best of intent. Like the business that Apple built, for them what they assumed to be true seems to be working out perfectly fine, so I don't doubt them on that. Maybe they are not your customers, and they won't be, and they hasn't
Yeah,
been so
sure.
far,
I mean,
and that's
at
not a
one point,
that's not a
the
bad
Roman
thing that,
Empire
yeah.
was flourishing.
Right, yeah. So again, there's
Now, what
no,
I mean is these are subjective,
yeah, these are
right? These are the
subjective.
subjective
This is
stances.
subjective and also temporal, and also depends on
Temporal,
the,
I mean, temporally subjective is what I
yeah,
meant.
yeah. So depending on which framework are you operating on right at the moment, and people have those things matter, right? Uh, the particular kind of users that Apple targets, you probably wouldn't target those that specific spectrum, and or if you even if you did, you wouldn't get the same response going along with the world model that you have in your head. Um, the first
Can
point
I
that,
just interject and
hmm,
clarify one thing
hmm,
here? So when I said the antithesis of the Steve Jobs model, I should have clarified that I meant in the popular representation of it.
I say,
That if you drill down deeper into why Steve Jobs says that, is it has its fundamentals in design. It's actually a design
yeah,
statement,
yeah,
which says that hide the complexity behind interfaces.
right, right.
The design transformation of that is that, which is why Apple interfaces are smoother, less cluttered.
Yeah,
The complexity is hidden.
I do not disagree with your disagreement. I'm absolutely fine with that. I'm just saying that that disagreement does not mean one is in the right, one is in the wrong. They're both optimizing for their own particular kind of game they want to play. You are optimizing for the kind of people and kind of user. Basically, from what I understand, you are building for the people or the users that you personally would want to be friends with, in a sense, like you would be on the same or similar frequency, and for those people it is going to be a false position to be in to assume them to be stupid. So you cannot do that, you are not allowed to do that, or you would not get very good result out of it. The part that I was going before that, you were mentioning something that um I'm kind of forgetting, like again, what did you start with? Sorry. There was a first point that you were trying to say, and I had something to talk about. If you can remember, that's fine.
So I was saying about the design first
Remember,
philosophy.
I remember. Yeah. So the reason, after significant amount of time being spent trying to make somebody understand why spending some time upfront, not much, and you have to do gradually lower and lower amount of that expenditure as you build out your bases and create your rules of thumbs. But why that is needed or important, how that does that save you in the long run, the part is entirely about going into their default mode. Most people in their default mode, everybody's, by the way, everybody's trying to optimize for where they put their energy in, or how they operate. Most people do not like being cerebral, and that includes many programmers. Like, it sounds weird, but point is, there's a very it doesn't need to be programmer or not. Cerebral, like, being cerebral is a very different way of being than not being cerebral. People who are cerebral would always prefer, sometimes to the wrong end, to be more cerebral than executional. For people who are more executional in that sense, would avoid or postpone or push back on spending time thinking about the validity of something than just going ahead, doing it, failing, somebody telling that, hey, I don't want it this way, I want pink, not black, and then changing it. Now, think the reason I come to that point is because if you have a better, well-designed picture in your head, you are allowed to be more declarative. But if you don't, then your default mode of operation becomes layers of paints. That's when you give the, what do you call that thing, the other approach starts with P, um, sorry, where you give one at a time instruction, do this and then that and then
The
that.
procedural.
Procedural, yeah, starts with P, yes. So you do that because that's the instruction that you have given, like, you have been given so far, you want to get that. Somebody says that, okay, that is wrong, you have to fix it, you can just append, and that is easier that way. And the approach that you see in a, again, because my mind races to the closest, nearest analogy that I have, is RISC versus CISC. All the x86, 64, etc., these computing mechanism we're using are CISC, right? These complex instruction sets that we're using, they keep on growing because of this addition of layer, these new instruction sets being added. At some point, the ecosystem is completely screwed up with, like, it's not manageable anymore. There's a more number of instruction sets than you can potentially ensure the safety of it, which is why those heartbleeds and all the other different things, that, not heartbleed, the new ones of Spectre and all these kind of things that come popping up, are because of that reason. Whereas on the other end, ARM or RISC-V, those are all based on RISC, like reduced instruction set compute. So those are more, I have planned out, these are all the instruction set required for me to get practically anything done. Those are all the building blocks I only need. Nothing else is required for me to get all those things done. You want to, like, add, multiply all these things, I have the registers or the accumulators for just that, and I will do that very efficiently. And I will not need to keep on patching up and adding more stuff to it in the bucket randomly, or ad hoc. Is because I figured that part out. Nothing more is required for me to do that thing. I just keep on adding more pipelines, and that will just give you more throughput if you need. But that's all there is to it. And that is fantastic. That is the reason why ARM is taking over. It takes a little bit longer time. Again, Windows versus Linux goes to the similar kind of concept. It takes a little longer. And that's the reason, that's the understanding that I'm coming to, that how do you win versus that short run? That's where people get mad at me when I say that that approach, it will win in the long run, but meanwhile you will get choked out of business because of this short-sighted people would choke you out of business by doing things that makes money in a short run. And your will to power has to outlast that and stay in the business. Like, there had been probably at least 20 different instances where Linux could go kaput, RISC or ARM could go kaput, because that staying in the business, they have to figure out a way to still be relevant in that, where everybody else is making more money, even if less, like, profound design. principle, right? So that part is where, again, so I'm really saying that because in software that is also going to be very relevant, because software, in hardware at least capital is required. So if you have more capital, you can still try to build your will to power, just because you can stay in business and you have decided. In software, you will get blown out of the water because anybody with a few lines of codes and no capital whatsoever can go ahead and do that thing poorly, but more that panders to the crowd or is more popular, like approach, and or whatever people are already using. Just give more of that, right? And they take over, and you basically don't get any footing whatsoever. That problem is there. So when I say that, I usually get flack for, and I know that you will also think of that same thing because I know how it works. You said like, no, that's kind of like trying to walk the middle ground, or you're trying to say that somebody said 2 + 2 = 4, somebody says 2 + 2 = 6. You're trying to say 2 + 2 = 5. Let's take the middle ground approach. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying have your sandbox perfect design, but figure out a way that something that makes you or allows you to stay in the business. That to that end, where you go ahead and finally establish that why you are right and why you would outlast all the other ones. But you cannot start with that purist or idealist approach up front, because then you will not have the lifespan that far. That's the challenge that I've seen so far. So that's where I'll end that one. I have to like kind of close it out though. So uh,
Yeah, I think we can just like leave notes on what we might go deeper in now. Um, I just want to leave with this that I see one opportunity, and that opportunity is specifically based on what we had planned on for Unicorn and the related more fundamental oriented project. And like I keep on saying, I think you and I are kind of in a position to drive something like that. In many ways, I'm talking of the sort of thing that Mozilla did with web browsers, forced web browsers to be open. If nothing else, the thing that Mozilla has
yeah.
accomplished is the creation of web standards to be taken more seriously, even though there are only a handful of players implementing a handful of things. But this thing that you first go to a forum where you propose something or you have implemented something, it stays behind a flag till it is standardized and so on. At least everybody's sharing. And as a result, you see browser innovation is at par.
Hmm. Hmm.
We cannot say that about the rest of application development, the rest of the ML landscape, the rest of the artificial intelligence landscape. If TensorFlow hadn't existed, if Pandas hasn't existed, if just 2, 3 small libraries had not existed, this entire ecosystem would have been a closed source ecosystem at this point.
Yeah.
So I think we got by just enough, just very close. So where I see there is a huge scope of developing is building these composable, rather combinatorial. I think composable is excessively overused, so I want to kind of use that term sparingly. But a very combinatorial system that allows definition of logic and takes care of the execution. So what you don't want is for the end user to take care of the execution. So then the software system kind of fills this gap to the point that I'm talking of building those adapters,
Hmm. Hmm.
something that plays with existing systems. But I think I want to expand the definition of unicorn to the point of it becomes a logical pipeline for building higher order complex logic. And then also decouple where it is by decoupling the rendering of the same system. So for example, the same logical unit
Right.
might be able to deploy to Unreal Engine, might be able to deploy to WebGL.
Right.
So I'm saying this is one area.
Right. With that said, the baseline is kind of established. In
Hmm.
my mind. So we talk about the how the adapter model can or should work.
Yeah.
You are enticing
Yeah.
me to actually start talking about it, and I'm resisting very
No,
hard
I'm saying
because
this
I
is
don't
what
know.
I want to
Yeah.
start off on
Mm.
the next
Okay.
one, because I think the way to scope it is, like I had said, I want to probably discuss flow-based programming a bit,
Yep.
ECS a bit, and why, like, I was very happy. I mean, let's just start with the definite description of this sentence. I was very happy when web components landed. I feel sad at the state of web components now,
Yeah.
or at least the way it is used.
Yeah.
and there are alternatives already. So, and I'm squarely looking at React. I'm looking at JSX and the polluter of the words. Uh, and
Oh, so I thought I was the only person still remaining who thinks of it that way. Like I could
no, no.
not.
So we have Svelte for a reason. There are people who thought that the web components architecture had more power. So there is a huge thing to be gained by looking at the fundamentals of web components, and these all derive from the same. So all I'm saying is we need to build on this, maybe focus on this topic from the what would such adapter look like
Mhm, mhm.
if we can, well, even get to the point that this is a, if nothing else, a research like a published paper, so that anybody can go and build, because we
Right.
might not have the time. If I am
We
not the
can,
builder,
we
I
can.
want to be the enabler.
Right.
And in fact, if I am doing that, why not be the enabler first? And there is a very small, lesser known success story on this ground, and I'll leave with that. There is the CRM for developer relations that some people who were in developer relations and closely associated with it built because no existing CRMs fit. And it's called orbit.love.
Okay.
Their
Okay.
first outcome was a blog post which talked of the Orbit framework, which said that look at your community as orbits instead of a funnel, which was the traditional marketing way that you say top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel.
Yep.
So it started there. And I'm saying there are enough predecessors who have done this that, and of course, Hyperloop is one example of the same thing, right? But
Yeah.
I'm saying that we might want to start there, publish a theoretical work, but in parallel, maybe a POC, because it's not that hard to anyway build it. But what
True.
I'm looking for, I mean, Matrix did the same. Matrix.org, the spec came first, the implementations followed. I'm seeing a general pattern. People who are trying to build sustainable software and sustainability of the organization as well,
Hmm.
that revenue kicks in after a certain product market fit. That is a universally accepted economic consequence. So how do you drive that product market fit in the early days of software that is more longer looking? If you look at the Matrix spec, the reference implementations don't match up to what the spec promises. They're still trying to, and that's the goal, that the
Asymptotic nature.
implementation, yeah, the implementation catches up to the specification.
Yep.
So then where does AI plugin and everything kind of follows
Right.
from there? But I feel like we start with a spec
Makes sense.
is the best way, and that way we can make that into a more community effort, more peer driven effort. We can have more
Yeah.
eyes, do a parallel implementation. And the reason I can approach this with certainty is I have tried many different flavors over these last few years, and I know where it won't work.
Mm. You have explored
So
all the dead ends in a sense.
like I have hit enough dead ends to
Yep.
know these are not the directions to take,
I
even though
see.
they seem most logical at first.
Cool.
So we can, well, sync up next week if next week's thing.
Next week works still, like so far, as in I don't have anything lined up there. I should have communicated this like today's thing to you already.
I still
I thought that.
converted 15 minutes to 1 hour 15 minutes. So
Yeah, so
that's good.
that happens. That ends up happening. That's fine. So I didn't know that there would be so many, like usually that part skips me, that there will be so many like groundwork to making tomorrow happen. So that's the part, and also that recording. This is gonna be my. I'm hoping this is gonna be beautiful. I'm actually gonna use it for as a talking head video camera and stuff. Like let's see how it goes, and if I end up making a video, I'll also, yeah, publish that in Breakerspace.
Hmm.
So
Maybe ask Rai if she thinks she was born on 31st September or 1st October. I'd like to see her response.
she knows. She knows very well.
No, no, no. Which
Uh,
one would she rather choose?
why? Like I didn't get if there is any particular meaning to it. She like she has a very strong sense of identity. Whatever is, she grew
Cool.
up knowing that it's her. Like it can be name, it can be the date of birth, etc. All those things. She's on it. Like that's the one I like it. There's no absolute, like no spread, like as in an objective reason to that. I'm not saying there's
Yeah,
a
I'm just
good or
talking
bad. I'm
of
just saying.
the arrangement of numbers, like 0102 or 0201, whether you write DDMM or MMDD. Is a very interesting number, as opposed to like if September had 31 days.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
mild absurdism. Let's not get into that.
No. So
But wish her
that
happy birthday.
that 0110 is something, or 1001, depending on DDMM or YMDD. That part is also like that part. She's not that much into it yet, but me and Momita are. So that is fantastic. That's why it's almost we chose that date. Like it's not that it happened randomly. I am a planner. You,
That
you you know
has
that.
You are a planner, but let's also acknowledge certain factors played in
So I
landing
I
on
don't
the
know
right
how
date.
much detail I want to give out, but let's just say that it
And
took
I
eight.
understand you planned it out.
It
I
took
understand you planned it out.
that first October. It was like basically 18 years into the making. So from puberty
Hmm.
to having a kid is basically like 18 years. I'm not gonna go more than
Hmm.
that, but
Makes sense.
anyways, but
Makes sense.
that was planned. That was planned. That was not out of the blue. That's not a coincidence. Anyways, all right, cool. Cheers.
Cool. Chalo,
That's
I'll
it then.
let you go.
Let's catch up to our next week. See ya.
Bye.
I'm gonna